Hi everyone, this is Valdes Moore. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about People First Language. What is People First Language? The People First Language is used to communicate appropriately and respectfully with and about an individual with a disability. People First Language also emphasizes the person first and not the disability. People First Language is about having respect and following the golden rule. People First Language can change the way we see a person, and it can also change the way a person sees himself or herself. Did you know that more than 1.17 million people in NSW have a disability? And that's around 1 in 5. So chances are that you know someone with a disability. It's also the most inclusive and most diverse group of all ages, genders, religions, ethnicities, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic levels are represented. People with disability lead everyday lives, and many people with disability, they go to school, they go to work, they get married, they have children, and they excel in society like everyone else. The power of language and labels. Words are powerful. What you say to someone is very, very powerful. So old and accurate descriptors and the inappropriate use of medical diagnosis perpetuate negative stereotypes. So when we see a diagnosis as the most important characteristic of a person, we devalue that person as an individual. So too often we make decisions about how, where the person will be educated based on their diagnosis, and that's wrong. So instead of the person's, we don't look at, the person's unique and individual strength and needs, so therefore we just judge them based on their diagnosis. When communicating with people with disability, it's important to emphasize abilities and not limitation. Do not use language that suggests the lack of something. Emphasize the need for accessibility and not the disability. Do not use offensive language, hence why words are powerful. They have power. Avoid language that implies negative stereotypes, and do not portray with disability as inspirational only because of their disability. And here are some tips, some etiquette and common courtesies for the next time that you are talking to, working with, or socializing with a person who happens to have a disability. So you want to avoid terms beginning with, such as, the blind or the disabled. Don't use words like abnormal, cripple, mongol, retard, or slow, like we work with kids. A lot of kids will say, oh, you're a retard, or this is retarded, oh, this person is slow. So really avoid those types of language. Don't use word like crazy. As human, we always say, oh, this is crazy, or you're crazy, or you're insane, lunatic, or mad, nuts, or wacko. So things like that, or can be offensive to people. Don't say things like dwarf, or don't use word like fit or attack, and don't say a person suffers or is afflicted with a disability. In my building, listen, I think it happens everywhere that, that we say these things sometimes and we don't really think about it. So some examples of languages, I think this is, common across the board. People, would say, people with disability. So instead of saying people with disability, you want to say the handicapped or the disabled. Like teachers will say, oh, he has a cognitive disability or diagnosis. So instead, of saying, he's mentally retarded. So you don't want to say a kid is mentally retarded. So the proper way to say it would be he has a cognitive disability or a diagnosis. Another good example in here is she's learning disabled. Another term for that would be she has a learning disability. So that would be the correct term to say. Another one I thought was really interesting around school is she's emotionally disturbed, mentally ill. So you could say things such as she has a mental health condition. So that's the proper way that you want to approach it. He's confined to a wheelchair bound. He uses a wheelchair, a mobility chair. She's in special ed. She's a special ed kid. She receives special education services. Normal or healthy kids, or you could say children without disability. So all these things that we use in our everyday language and we don't really think about them and we don't really think about how they affect people. So I think this is a really good exercise for us to start, normalizing these words and these languages into our everyday lives, especially working in education. We want to familiarize ourselves with the proper term to use, and especially when we sit in these IEP meetings with parents, we want to be able to use these terms properly and respectfully. Appropriate language to use. I mean, I like this pledge that, that was shared as one of their resources. I think I would definitely, use this pledge. I like everything about it. It's very similar to, what I just mentioned in the last screen. Instead of saying, mental retardation, cognitive disability. So you kind of want to, pledge, have everyone sign this pledge so that way they promise to learn the proper way to address people with disabilities. So I would definitely share this, around my building so that way people can start familiarize themselves with the proper term to use when working with student with special education and student with disability. In conclusion, when communicating with or about people with disability, remember they may only have one disability, but they also may have many disability as well. Be aware of invisible disability. Some disabilities are obvious and while others are not. So not everybody, has a disability that you might not be able to see it and it's not visible. So be aware of that. So that's why it's good to familiarize yourself with the proper term to use. So you don't want to use the wrong term around someone and you offend that person. And just because someone has a disability, it doesn't mean that he or she, is courageous, brave, special, or inspirational. So people with disability, they have talents, they have skills and abilities just like everyone else. And always ask a person with disability if they need help before you're rushing in, because sometimes they may not always need help. So you want to ask them before you go out and help them. If you offend a person with disability, simply just apologize, as you would if you were to offend anyone else. Like if I say something and I use the wrong term, I usually catch myself right away and apologize. We're all human, we're not perfect, so it's important to apologize. The golden rule is really to treat everybody the same because we are all equal. And here are my references. Thank you for listening today, and I'll see you in the next presentation.